The ceremony will begin in 5 minutes. We're experiencing some tech difficulties, so we're going to start 5 minutes late. And in the meantime, you can enjoy some more of Fincraft's music. Thank you for your patience, and we're going to see you at 4:05.
That was beautiful, Moro, yes.
Yeah, I know, I said like twice.
You forgot to mention Fincraft. You did.
Could the House please come to order? Honorable Secretary General, Deputy Secretary Generals, student officers, Herr Kleine-Kraneburg, Miss Hale, Dr. Engler, Herr Yaffa, Herr Tanurs, Herr Hachmöller, distinguished delegates, directors, and guests. On behalf of the BERMUN team, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 16th annual session of the BERMUN2 conference. My name is Marius von Kleist, and I have the honor of serving as President of the General Assembly at this year's conference. Seated to my left is Conrad Chisholm, this year's Secretary General, and to my right are Lena Jekite and Nico Hammer, who will be serving as the Deputy Secretary Generals.
On behalf of all participants, we would like to thank the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for their continued support of our conference, and though this year has presented the world with many hardships and prevented us from having our opening ceremony there at the CAS, we are hoping and looking forward to the collaborative effort for next year's conference. At this time, we would like to honor and introduce Herr Klein-Kranenberg, who will speak on behalf of the CAS to welcome us into this year's conference. We are grateful to Herr Klein-Kranenberg for his long-standing support for the BERMUN program. You now have the floor.
Smile, Lena.
Smile and wave, smile and wave. My God. Guys. Oh no.
At the end of February. A little later came the first nationwide lockdown. Like many others, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation cancelled hundreds of events nationwide from one day to the next and quickly switched to digital formats and educational offerings. After relaxations and additional cautious presence measures in summer, came in November again the abandonment of presence event and then the next complete lockdown. Until recently, we hoped to be able to hold and stream at least the opening event in our large forum as a hybrid event. However, after consulting with our management of the foundation, we were asked to refrain from doing so in a view of the difficult and sensitive situation. Even so, I was extremely sorry. We have, of course, complied with the request. For this year's BERMUN conference, you have chosen a topic that is as important as it is urgent worldwide, but also multifaceted and exciting. It is also a topic that is of particular concern and interest of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. If you enter the term migration in the search function of our website, you will get 813 hits. These are mainly events in Germany, but especially worldwide in various countries where we are represented by one of our 107 foreign offices. I'm excited to continue now listening, and I'm already looking forward to our BERMUN conference next year at the Academy of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. And I fully agree with Jason Lang, who wrote me in one of our last mails, the best BERMUN conference ever. But now, good luck, great and important experiences, and at last, but not least, a lot of fun at this year's digital conference version. Thank you very much and all the best to you.
Thank you, Herr Klein-Kranenberg, for your kind welcome and for your remarks on our situation. We, too, look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you to the Konrad Adenauer Foundation.
We are also thankful for the support of the John F. Kennedy School and are pleased to have the acting American Vice Principal, Ms. Erin Hale, virtually joining us. For many years, Ms. Hale has been a reliable supporter of the MUN program, working together with our school's music department to ensure that we were able to use their rooms when we were still able to meet in person. Throughout these challenging times, Ms. Hill has once again proven to be an enthusiastic supporter of the program, ensuring that this conference would be possible despite all the hardships that we are facing. Ms. Hill, we are grateful that, despite your busy schedule and many school-related obligations, you are able to speak to us today. You now have the floor. Wrong movie.
Welcome to the 16th Annual Spring Conference of the Berlin Model United Nations. My name is Erin Hale, and I'm the Acting American High School Assistant Principal at the John F. Kennedy School. We're so happy to have you join us in spite of all of the challenges we continue to face from the COVID-19 global pandemic. This year's conference, which will include over 200 participants from 30 schools and 9 countries, is a celebration of continuity and community. And even virtually, we are excited to provide you with the opportunity to exchange diverse ideas, engage in honest and open discourse, and work together towards our common goals. This conference is not possible without the help of many committed people and organizations. We would like to extend our gratitude to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for their long support of BERMUN2. We would also like to recognize and thank our guest speakers for the conference, Philip Engler from the World Bank and human rights activist Moro Yaffa. I would also like to extend a special thank you and congratulate the students and staff of the Kennedy School for their efforts and hard work. To the BERMUN team of Jason Lang, Bill Robertson, Yvonne Kupp, Johannes Luck, Helga Martins, Stina Pfaff, and Andrea Robertson. We appreciate your commitment to our students and to the vision and mission of MUN. To the student members of BERMUN, who have also donated countless hours to the preparation and planning of this conference, thank you. Your passion and professionalism are unmatched, and we are proud to have you as representatives of JFK. The Secretariat for this year's conference, composed of JFKS students Conrad Chisholm, Marius van Kleist, Lena Diakite, and Nico Hammer, have chosen the theme, Managing Migration in the 21st Century. As a community with a large migrant population, and as an international migrant myself, I'm particularly interested in this topic and excited to hear where your discussions and combined efforts will lead. I encourage you, regardless of your experience, mother tongue language, or age, to actively engage in the sessions over the next 3 days. You bring unique perspectives and your voice is important. Once again, on behalf of the John F. Kennedy School, welcome to this year's conference. We hope you have fun and enjoy the next 3 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hill, for your remarks on the importance of Model United Nations in these trying times and the John F. Kennedy School's continuous support for the BERMUN program.
For the next 2 days, you'll be debating a number of topics related to our conference theme, Managing Migration in the 21st Century. Therefore, we would like to invite Nico Hammer, one of this year's Deputy Secretary Generals, to take the floor to elaborate on the individual committee topics and their link to our theme and aspects of managing migration. Nico has been a dedicated member of the BERMUN team for many years and never ceases to add a bit of joy into late-night meetings through his lighthearted spirit. Mr. Deputy Secretary General, you have the floor.
COVID-19. On December 31st of 2019, government authorities reported hundreds of this now very familiar disease in Wuhan, China. What happened then, you all know. Since January of last year, more than 100 million people have been infected with COVID-19, and 2.5 million people have died. The pandemic has impaired all of our lives. Luckily, many of us can maintain social distancing, wear a mask, and take measures to reduce the risk of being infected with COVID-19. And at least some of us have access to adequate medical care. Not everyone is that fortunate, however. When workplaces and factories were shut down in India due to the lockdown, tens of millions of migrant workers lost their jobs. They walked hundreds of miles to get back to their home communities. 198 of them died because of exhaustion and traffic accidents. Indian migrant workers faced and still face unemployment, poverty, and starvation. Despite lockdowns all over the world, migration is still taking place. Especially now, it is happening in dangerous conditions. This stresses the need for managing migration. But what should we manage? To answer this question, we need to consider the path of a migrant. We need to examine their home, their journey, and their destination. Managing migration at the home of a migrant will primarily include addressing its root causes. People migrate partly because of push factors in their home communities. These can range from insufficient economic opportunities to humanitarian crises. The International Court of Justice will look at one root cause of migration. They will re-examine the case of Croatia versus Serbia on the crime of genocide and bring proper justice to Croatian and Serbian displaced persons. The delegates of the Security Council, on the other hand, will debate on how to end one of the worst conflicts of the century, the Yemeni civil war. The SC will also look at the journey of migrants. They will attempt to find solutions to provide a safe pathway for migrants passing through Yemen and Yemeni refugees to their destination. Migrants, especially displaced persons, do not always know what their destination is. It is often unclear where they will end up. And in this century, we face a new threat: climate change. UN estimates say that by 2050, there will be between 50 million to 1 billion climate refugees. That is why the junior MUN will debate the issue of environmentally displaced persons and find solutions on how to properly and safely relocate them. But once migrants arrive at their destination, what is next? They still carry their cultural identity from their homes. They may face hate in their new communities, and they will not always have decent economic opportunities. This is the case for many refugees. They arrive at a refugee camp and live in poor and crowded living conditions. These circumstances often negatively impact their psychological state. Hence, the political committee will be debating on how to prevent radicalization in refugee camps, looking at their management and how to provide more economic opportunities for refugees. Meanwhile, the Human Rights Committee will look at the integration of migrants from a cultural perspective by fostering intercultural tolerance in host communities. They will try to find solutions on how to culturally integrate migrants through assimilation, multiculturalism, and different concepts. GA3 will discuss the solutions of managing integration with a more socioeconomic focus by ensuring secure conditions for refugees in host communities. At this year's BERMUN2, we must examine the challenges of migration in migrants' homes, journeys, and destinations. When looking at the home of a migrant, we must address the reasons for which people migrate, such as insufficient economic opportunities and armed conflict. When looking at the journey of a migrant, we have to ensure that migrants are safe when they travel. When looking at the destination of a migrant, we must look at their integration into their host communities while considering their national and cultural identities, as well as the consequences of migration in host countries. But only after we have answered the question of what should we manage can we ask, how do we manage migration?
Thank you, Nico, for highlighting the committee topic's connection to the overall theme. Next, I am pleased to introduce this year's keynote speaker, Dr. Philipp Engler. He was a professor for macroeconomics at the FU and has done extensive research concerning migration. Currently, he works in the Multilateral Surveillance Division of the IMF Research Department, where he has made various policy contributions. Following the keynote address, you, the delegates, will have a chance to ask Dr. Engler questions. If you would like to pose a question, please access the BERMUN platform and send your question to the Secretariat Forum mailbox using the category General Conference/Forum Info. Selected questions will be read out by the Secretariat. We ask that you keep your questions clear and concise. Dr. Engler, You now have the floor.
Just share my screen. And share. Do you see my slides now? Okay, great, thank you. Good afternoon to Berlin, and a big thank you to the organizers for having me. As a native from Zehlendorf, it's a really big pleasure to be here. I will introduce you to a chapter from the World Economic Outlook from last April. The World Economic Outlook is one of our flagship publications where we address key economic policy questions that we try to tackle with scientific rigor. This one is about the macroeconomic effects of global migration. Migration is an issue that has been put aside a little bit by the pandemic, with travel restrictions limiting a lot of the previous dynamics. But once the crisis is over, we can expect migration to be back on the agenda, of course. We're looking into the macroeconomic effects, whereby we mean the effects on aggregate economic variables like gross domestic output, employment, and aggregate productivity. Starting with a few stylized facts, in absolute terms, migration has increased substantially. In 2019, 270 million people were migrants, here defined as people living outside their country of birth. This is 120 million more than in 1990. But as a share of the global population, this is only a small increase. This share has been pretty stable over the past decades. We see in the first figure that the largest number are migrants among emerging market and developing economies, but the largest increase has been from emerging market economies to advanced economies, so from poorer to richer countries. On the second figure, we see also a sharp increase in refugee migration over the past few years, following a rise in conflicts, with most refugees residing in emerging market and developing economies. This figure shows the migration flows over the past decade, and the size of the arrows are proportional to the size of the flows between and within geographical regions. We see that the largest flows are within those admittedly large regions. And the first observation, this is a very important first observation. From a global perspective, many migrants tend not to move very far from their home. The largest flows are within Europe and Central Asia, with a lot of migration from Central and Eastern Europe to Western Europe and within the former Soviet Union. The question we are addressing in this chapter are what drives international migration and how will it evolve in the future. So we are looking in the past what explanatory variables were for migration patterns, and then we try to look using that information and making a look into the future and trying to figure out what we can expect in the next few decades. Then with this in the background, we're asking what the macroeconomic effects of international migration are and what role policies have to shape those effects. Starting with the drivers and future migration pressures, we're seeing here in this figure results from a gravity model. So gravity model are used to explain flows of goods and people, so trade and migration between countries. They are called gravity models because they are describing the forces of attraction between countries. In the left pie chart, we see the relative importance of determinants of migration from emerging markets and developing economies to advanced economies, so from poorer to richer countries. And the probability to migrate between two countries rises when they have a common border, they are geographically closer, they have a common language, they have previous colonial links, the income level in the destination is higher, and the income gap is large, and at the same time, the origin country has a young population. But the last point is very interesting. If you have a large income gap from a source to a destination country, and a lot of young people, then this is a good predictor of migration between countries. What is a bit unclear or ambiguous is the role for income, for the income level in the source country, in the country of origin. Let's try to approach this issue, this question of the role of source country income by a little thought experiment. If migration costs, so the cost of migrating from one country to another, were the same for all country pairs, then high-income countries, advanced economies, would attract virtually all world migration. But we don't see that. So the costs are very different across country pairs, and they're smaller for shorter migrations. For moving to a neighboring country, these costs are smaller. Or moving to a country with the same language is also cheaper because you don't have to learn the language. And it shows that these costs of migration can be prohibitively high for some countries of origin. We find that for very poor countries, an increase in income is associated with an increase in immigration, while above some threshold, a further increase in income reduces immigration. The reason is that for the former groups, so for the poorest countries, the costs of migration are prohibitively high, and higher income means that more people can afford to immigrate. For somewhat wealthier countries, rising incomes imply less of a reason to emigrate. A first turning point is an income per capita level of around $2,000 when immigration from emerging market and developing economies to other emerging market and developing economies starts to decline. And the second turning point for migration from poor to rich countries is at a per capita level of $7,000. So why that matters? Well, we're seeing here on the left figure that the number of countries below the $7,000 threshold has been declining over the past decades, and is also projected to further decline over the next 30 years. However, these are estimates from before the crisis, so we don't know what the long-term costs of or the economic implications of the current crisis are. But at least from that perspective here, we can expect to see less immigration from rising incomes in source countries. However, on the right-hand side, we see that the population growth is continuing in many poor regions, and this population growth will increase the young population, which together with the large income gaps will raise immigration. We have two forces working in opposite direction regarding future immigration pressure. We have a few further drivers of migration, which I'm just skipping over here, and turning to our future migration pressure scenarios. We use our estimates that I just presented to assess those future migration patterns. For the region of Europe and Central Asia, we see an increase in the number of migrants of 24 million in the next 30 years, which is shown in this black bar. Behind this total, we see a large shifts regarding the origin countries. Migration within the region is projected to decline strongly, which is explained by the shrinking populations and rising incomes in Eastern Europe. We're expecting, or we are projecting, increased immigration from Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. And this later effect will more than offset the reduced internal migration in Europe. Turning to the effects of migration in recipient countries, we're seeing here the figure that a 1 percentage point increase in immigration inflow relative to employment increases output by almost 1% by the 5th year, which is a sizable effect. So after a large inflow of migrants, 5 years later, there is an increase in GDP of 1%. Why is it the case? Why is GDP output boosted? Well, output rises through an increase in productivity, which means that in every hour worked, the average employee or entrepreneur produces more. The best explanation for why this happens is the so-called complementarity between natives and immigrants' work. The arrival of immigrants makes natives more productive. But the question is, why is that so? Let's start with an example. If an immigrant brings with him very sophisticated skills, like an IT specialist, for example, he may bring expertise to the company that makes everyone more productive. On the other end of the skills spectrum, if an immigrant is less educated, he may make others more productive by providing services to natives that allows them to specialize in what they can do best. Here in America, for example, a whole army of nannies from Latin America allows many women to work. And we also see that the arrival of immigrants induces natives to switch to more sophisticated jobs, leaving the less sophisticated jobs to immigrants. Overall, we see no statistically significant decline in natives' aggregate employment after increase in immigration. So the often heard concern that there will be on aggregate, there will be losers in the labor markets. We don't see that in the aggregate data. We see that in certain parts of the labor market, but not at the aggregate. So turning to the policies, we see that that some of them really make a big difference for the macroeconomic effects of immigration. We're looking here at the employment growth, the effect of immigration on employment growth. And we see that higher spending on adult vocational training and on active labor market policies are associated with greater employment growth after the immigration shock. So policies can be used to allow the pie to increase by more when immigrants arrive. And we have an additional result that refugee immigration to emerging market and developing economies has no detectable effect on output. Why could that be the case? Well, refugees flee conflict. They do not select the destination country according to their skills, and they often face legal and physical barriers to work. So they might not have the right to work, and if they are if they have to live in a refugee camp, they don't have the opportunities to work. So it's not surprising that we don't see the positive macroeconomic effects that we see from other forms of migration. But there is a large literature that identifies policies that can improve those labor market outcomes, unsurprisingly granting work permits early, supporting refugees with language training. Physical and mental health support is a key issue here for refugees. Shortening refugee recognition processes and shortening the stay in asylum accommodations have shown to be crucial to improve the economic impacts of refugees in destination countries. Coming to the conclusions, under our baseline scenario, migration pressures remain stable over the next decades, but migration pressures from emerging market and developing economies to advanced economies will continue. Immigration into advanced economies brings significant aggregate benefits, even in the short and medium run. And these benefits are not detected in case of refugee immigration in emerging market and developing economies. We find that migration contributes to world GDP growth and sustains natives' average incomes. Active labor market and retraining policies, better integration of immigrants can enhance positive effects of immigration. And of course, international cooperation is needed to support refugees in emerging market developing economies because the recipient countries often cannot bear the burden of integrating the refugees. And then lastly, because while we find that the aggregate effects are positive for native employment, there might still be losers in some parts of the labor market. But since the aggregate pie is increasing, there's a role for redistributive policies to make sure that the losses are not too large for some parts of society. Okay, thank you very much. I'm stopping here and I'm happy to take questions. I can't hear anybody.
Yeah, neither can I. That's somewhat concerning. I'll send them a message.
I'm sorry, it seems like we're experiencing some tech issues. Okay, it should work now. Dr. Engler, can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Thank you. Our first question is...
I'm sorry, it seems like we're experiencing some tech issues.
Our first question is, you mentioned that interregional migration in Europe will shrink sharply. Do you also project this to be the case for other regions?
I will have to. Well, let's go to this slide. I mentioned this. If I can. I just mentioned Europe because I thought that would be most interesting for most of you. Here, within Europe, can you see that? Yeah. Within Europe, we have this very large negative bar, and we don't have any comparable bars in other regions. And I think the reason is that the population dynamics are most miserable in Europe. The population will decline fastest in Europe, and we don't see anything similar in other regions. No, I think this is kind of the country, the region where this effect is strongest.
Thank you. Our second question is, seeing as labor markets are becoming increasingly nationalized because of COVID-19, what would be your suggestions for increasing economic migration again?
This is an interesting question because on the one hand, you're pointing out to some policy measures closing borders, making it more difficult to enter a country and be a migrant. So my suggestion would be not to do that, not to be kind of turn inside and close borders to immigrants, because we're seeing these positive benefits of immigration. If it's well done, if it's well managed, if it's accompanied with the right policies, it can be a kind of a win-win situation for everybody, for both the natives and, even more importantly, for the immigrants.
Thank you. Our third question is, what is the impact of migrants on colleges and the education system, and how can we best integrate them into our education systems?
We didn't look into this, and I really have to admit that I'm not the person to address this question. But I suppose that if language barriers are overcome, which have to be overcome in any case, this is the best way to make it easy for immigrants to attend college. But of course, then the conditions, there might be other preconditions to be accepted to college. These are educational challenges that will have to be addressed. So again, it's a matter of training, of educating, of allowing access to education in whatever form to immigrants, and this is probably the best way to integrate immigrants in colleges and universities. But I have to admit, as I said in the beginning, I'm not an expert on these issues.
Our next and final question is, can foreign interference to stabilize countries result in the returning of refugees or nationalist insurgencies?
So could you repeat that, please? I didn't fully get that.
Can foreign interference to stabilize countries result in the returning of refugees or nationalist insurgencies?
Yeah, I have to pass that on. That's not in the realm of my expertise. So I guess it's more something that a question that you have to ask political scientists, I guess, or crisis experts. Yeah, we cannot say anything about this. I'm sorry.
Due to some technical difficulties and the fact that the audience could not hear me when I explained how to submit questions, I will once again do so. Again, if you wish to pose a question, please access the BERMUN platform and send a message to the Secretariat Forum mailbox using the category General Conference forum info. We will again be opening the floor to some more questions.
Yeah. Seeing as Dr. Engler could not answer that question, we will be having a different final question, which is, what is the economic effect of immigration on developing countries?
Of immigration or of emigration?
Emigration.
Of emigration. Yeah, there is a long literature that we haven't looked into this. This was not the focus of our study here, but there are basically two things that have been detected. The first one is, of course, a brain drain. Like if the most able parts of the population are emigrating, they will of course not add to the output of their source, of the origin country. So that's a big loss. On the other hand, they might not have the opportunities. They might have much better, or they are likely to have much better opportunities to work in their destination country. And what we're seeing is very large flows of remittances supporting many countries sizably. And for some countries, this is much bigger. These remittance flows are much more important than official development aid and so on. So these are very big impacts. This could be good. So it supports families in origin countries. But of course, it can also be an obstacle to development. One has to be careful not to say this is kind of our development path, sending our young people abroad to send money back home. This should not be an excuse for development action in the origin countries to improve economic outcomes for people living there and staying there. Because the ultimate goal should be that people have their living in their home country. The choice, most people would probably decide not to leave their home country. So this is a dealing in a world of like third best, right? It's not the first best, it's not the second best world, it's the third best. But in this third best world, the effects on source countries can be quite beneficial too.
Dr. Engler, thank you once again for your speech and your answers to the delegates' questions. Please accept this token of our appreciation. We will be sending this to you along with some other bits and bobs. Yeah, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule and speaking with us today.
Thank you very much, and good luck with this super interesting conference. All the best.
Migrants have different reasons for leaving their home communities. Some flee violence and persecution. Some seek better economic opportunities or education. Sam Hatanus is someone who fled armed conflict. In 2015, he left Syria due to the ongoing civil war. Hatanus immigrated to the German city of Rothenburg-Wümme. Here, he befriended author and lecturer Gerd Hachmüller. Last year, they published the book Kommt ein Syrer nach Rothenburg-Wümme? Versuche meine neue deutsche Heimat zu verstehen, translated as this: a Syrian comes to Rothenburg-Wümme, attempts to understand my new German homeland, detailing Hatanus' experiences in living in Germany as a person with an Arabic background. Hatanus and Hachmüller kindly dedicated their time to answering our question on how it is to indefinitely leave your home country and live in an almost completely foreign culture.
Ja, erstens, ich habe meine Heimat wie die meisten Syrer wegen des Krieges verlassen. Die Situation war für mich unsicher. Keine Sicherheit für uns, gab es Explosionen, Raketen auf die Städte. Ja, das war nicht schön. Und das Leben ist sehr teuer geworden. Keine Zukunft, ein Krieg gedauert und man weiß, wann wird dieser Krieg zu Ende gehen. Und deswegen, ich habe mich entschlossen, nach Deutschland zu kommen.
Das ist jetzt schwierig, weil ich mit dem Thema nicht begonnen habe, als ich Herrn Tannus kennengelernt habe, sondern schon ein bisschen vorher. Also ich habe schon vorher in einem Flüchtlingscamp gearbeitet und habe dort viele Araber kennengelernt. Am eindrücklichsten, also ich sag mal nicht der eindrücklichste, aber der erste kulturelle Unterschied, der mir aufgefallen ist, dass Araber sehr indirekt kommunizieren. Also im Flüchtlingscamp, wo ich war, gab es einen Flüchtling, der mich immer angesprochen hat und mir Honig um den Bart geschmiert hat, der immer gesagt hat, Herr Hachmüller, Sie machen das so gut und es ist so schwer, hier ein Flüchtlingscamp zu leiten. Und ich wusste immer gar nicht, was er von mir wollte. Und der kam jeden Tag wieder an und ich wusste immer nicht, warum er mir meine Zeit stiehlt. Und irgendwann kam ein anderer Flüchtling und hat gesagt, Herr Hachmüller, wissen Sie, was dieser Mann von Ihnen will? Ich sage, nein, ich weiß überhaupt nicht, was der von mir will. Der redet immer mit blumigen Worten auf mich ein, aber ich weiß nicht, was er von mir will. Dann sagt er, Herr Hachmüller, der ist homosexuell. Und der braucht ein anderes Zimmer, weil er in seinem Zimmer gemobbt wird. Da habe ich mich gefragt, warum sagt er mir das nicht? Ja, das konnte er ihm nicht sagen. Der hat das versucht, indirekt zu sagen, aber so weit ist er nie gekommen. Und dann hat er indirekt kommuniziert über diesen Freund, der mir das gesagt hat. Also Araber kommunizieren oft indirekt über Bande und versuchen erst die Beziehungsebene herzustellen, bevor sie zur Sache kommen. Und das ist bei Deutschen genau umgekehrt. Deutsche kommen immer sofort zur Sache und besprechen im Anschluss eventuell noch was Privates. Und Deutsche haben auch weniger Probleme damit, auch kritische Themen direkt anzusprechen, ohne dass man Angst hat, das Gesicht zu verlieren. Und das ist bei Arabern komplett anders, bei den meisten.
Wenn man keine Kontakte hat, er kann nicht wissen, wie die Deutschen denken. Das war die erste, schwierig, der erste Kontakt mit den Deutschen, den Kontakt immer zu suchen. Und das war bis jetzt. Ich sage jetzt, wir brauchen, und ich bemerke zum Beispiel, dass meine Töchter in der Schule, obwohl dass sie zum Beispiel, wir sind zusammengekommen, aber sie sind besser integriert als uns und sie kennen viel besser die deutsche Mentalität als wir, weil sie in der Schule, sie passen 5-6 Stunden mit ihren Freunden und sie sind im Kontakt. Das war für mich persönlich und meine Frau die größte Schwierigkeit.
Und manchmal bringen deine Töchter auch Teile der deutschen Mentalität
mit
hier nach Hause und dann kollidiert das mit euren arabischen Vorstellungen.
Ja, das ist ja. Was ist die Frage?
Wie können sich Flüchtlinge besser integrieren? Was könnte ihnen leichter gemacht werden von Deutschland?
Wie ein Rezept, meinen Sie, oder so? Ja, ich denke, dass nach der Sprache, erstens, sie müssen die Sprache lernen. Das ist, ohne Sprache, man kann über Integration nicht reden. Zweitens der Will, sie müssen der Will und die Lust auch zu integrieren. Und das Land, wo sie sind, mögen und leben, wenn sie eine Liebe für dieses Land haben. Und sie werden auf jeden Fall, sie werden sich begeistert sein und sie werden die Lust und die Will zeigen und dann sie können das schaffen. Und auch Arbeit und Lust auf die Arbeit, Lust zu sagen, ja, das ist mein Land, ich wollte etwas in diesem Land machen. Und dann sie werden sich fühlen, das ist meine Heimat, mein Land. Und so, also so klappt Integration. So.
Anna Hachmüller for allocating their valuable time to share this inspiring story and interesting perspective on multiculturalism to benefit our conference. If you would like to watch the full interview, please check out the press page at 7:30 p.m. today.
Next, I am pleased to introduce this year's keynote speaker, Mr. Yaffa. Mr. Yaffa is a radio show host, producer, and migrant advocate here in Berlin. As a migrant himself, Mr. Yaffa uses his various platforms to raise awareness, conduct lectures, and workshops to focus on gender equality and on empowering women, minorities, and refugees. Following the keynote address, you, the delegates, will have the chance to ask Mr. Yaffa questions. If you would like to pose a question, please access the BERMUN platform and send your question to the Secretariat Forum mailbox using the category General Conference and Forum Info. Selected questions will be read out by the Secretariat. We ask that you keep your questions clear and concise. Please make note of your questions while Mr. Yaffa speaks. Mr. Yaffa, you now have the floor.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, BERMUN2, for having me here as a keynote speaker. My name is Moro Yaffa. I come from the Gambia in West Africa. I am a radio maker and a human rights advocate. I am a founding member of We Are Born for Empowerment Radio, the first African self-organized radio in Berlin, and a board member of the Radio Networks Berlin, e.V. I conduct lectures and workshops that focus on refugees, gender equality, and empowering women and minorities. I also advocate back at home about the risks, dangers, and challenges of migration and Europe, based on facts from my experiences. I also work as a language and cultural mediator at the community level with sub-Saharan African migrants living in Berlin. I am a very victim of this current migration problem we have that we are here to discuss today. In 2013, I left my home country, the Gambia, in search of a greener pasture here in Europe. Europe that made me inferior based on its human, economic, cultural, and political destructions in our history. Living in the Gambia back a days before leaving told me that I couldn't have made a life and living in its economic disaster and political catastrophe, a time and a regime when I was a bit earlier born, grown up, and got educated in a basic educational standard without being able or having access to further or continue my education career. After losing hope, self-confidence, and optimism about life and living in my country, the Gambia, I decided to leave the country unknowingly and knowingly what my future would have looked ahead of me, which might have resulted to either do or die, as we call it in the Gambia, back way, illegal way to Europe. I left the Gambia on the 3rd of October 2013 to Senegal, proceeded to Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Libya, by crossing Sahara Desert, as you all may know it as either deadly of its longer voyage, militia gang smuggling, or deadly of its hunger and thirsty. After surviving 7 days hardship journey, arrived in Libya, where everyday life was everywhere gunshots, kidnapping, raping, torturing, and slavery. For 6 months living in hell and with all struggling and aiming to cross what was ahead of me, the Mediterranean, after every day hearing the loss of the lives of fellow brothers and sisters crossing before me, due to its notorious human trafficking of migrants and externalization of European borders. I left Libya on the 8th of June 2014 after completing my last prayers on the soil, sacrificing my soul for Europe in a very dark, wavy, and cold sea with 115 people loaded in a small dinghy boat, all hoping for better life and greener pasture. After driving 20 hours while the machine broke, the compass lost signal, and boat took in water, everyone got desperate, confused, and lost hope. All 150 souls expecting death in the middle of the sea, without any help or access to help. While all kept praying for God to save, later after 3 hours of me dreaming my ancestors in the grave, I opened my eyes in the most unforgettable dramatic event in my life. I saw a big ship where everyone was fighting for his life. I see people climbing on the big ship while we got pulled down in the between two boats, while just screaming, and are gone by high waves in the middle of the sea. I tried to jump over to the big ship, got pulled by someone, fell in between the boats, while luckily pulled by someone into the small boat. swam inside the boat full with water, tried out and climbed in the big ship with tears and cries upon Allah's name for saving my life. After when realizing that we have lost 115 people from our boat carrying 115 people, while we remain 100 in the rescue boat to Italian coast of Pozzallo in Sicilia, where we were docked, being taken away into the reception camp, spent a night, transferred to my first destination in Europe at Victoria in Sicilia, where I had to apply an asylum for a permit of stay and protection. Overall, what I have gone through in my journey after spending 6 months of isolation, loneliness, and trauma, I had to leave for Germany, where I arrived in 2014. Upon my arrival, I found myself in a prison like a hell, lager camps, mostly completely isolated from society, having to live under inhuman conditions and constant surveillance by the authorities. I refused to live in those inhuman and frankly colonial conditions, so I broke the isolation and silence and demanded my basic human rights and chose where I went and what to do or be. Under such miserable conditions for years, I was not allowed to work, not allowed to take language classes. My movement has been restricted and controlled by individuals, and every day living in fear of deportation. With all the struggles and challenges I have endured, has never made me lose hope or pull back. It has only enhanced and shown me of what I am fighting for: colonial impact, white supremacy, and externalization of EU borders regime. By asking myself, what is immigration and should migration be a crime, I came with the fact about the hidden responsibilities, causes, common misconceptions, and colonial impact of Europe towards Africa. As immigration defines the international movement of peoples into a destination country of which they are not natives or where they do not possess citizenship, and to take an employment as a migrant worker or temporarily as a foreigner, then I see no reason why it should be a crime for those who are in the position to migrate. The EU contributed to Africa's economy misery due to its selfish external trade policy. Nevertheless, the prevailing perspectives of the EU and of its member states concerning African immigration remains to be focused on security, the foreclosure of its external borders, and prevention. Current EU programs and concepts to fight African migration are questionable. Even development-oriented approaches are bound to fail if not backed by sustainable immigration policies. Europe industrialized Africa based on their economic interests. Africa's economic history is a history of large population movements driven by a variety of reasons, notably slave trade, colonialism, and imperialism by the Europeans. Violent conflicts interfered, being generated by the Western powers, extreme poverty caused by the European looting and appropriation of Africans' resources, culture, and economy. Still up to date, most Africans live under conditions of extreme poverty and definitely insecurity. Migration is not necessarily a zero game where one side loses to the benefits of others. This holds for Africa too. In the ideal case, all parties involved could gain benefit if it's taken into mutual interest and equal level. The migrants, their families at home, the countries of origin, and the receiving countries. If the migration would be properly managed out of being criminalized in the overall interest, but unfortunately, selfish interest of major players, which are Europeans involved in this game, both on an individual and state level, by their discouragement and zero migration policies on the path of the fortress Europe, for example, encouraging irregular migration, smuggling, and marginalization and exploitation of migrants on different levels and stages of their journey to Europe. As Africa loses their educated peoples, as many have most to gain by Europe of their resources, endowment, and they are more vulnerable than others to benefit from the pull factors, like better living and economic conditions in their host countries. This is one of the reasons for considerable brain drain, which is the emigration of highly trained or qualified people from a particular country. As Africa lost part of its academic workforce to highly industrialized countries like Europe and the US, Africa has been the most important source of this brain drain due to the economic and or political crisis being caused and generated by the Western powers. However, I also see the positive part of it, which is the opposite of brain drain, which is brain gain, which is an increase in the number of highly foreign-born professionals entering a country to live and work where greater opportunities are available, which is transfer of knowledge or innovation and consolidation of extension of foreign trade relations, new value systems, political and spiritual orientations acquired by weedy migrants in Europe. And what we imported into our home countries often contributed significantly to the development of Africa. I could give an example. Migrants among the African political elite, including myself, and mostly educated people at European universities played a decisive role in many liberation movements in the continent. Example, some of the heroes of African independence, like Leopold Sédar Senghor from Senegal, Cheikh Anta Diop from Senegal, Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana, Dawda Kairaba Jawara from the Gambia, and Nelson Mandela from South Africa, and many exiled politicians and activists. In addition, remittances of African migrants can contribute considerably, not just the well-being of our families back home, but to poverty reduction and development on regional and state levels, or even dictatorship regime change. I can give an example of my country, the Gambia, where we had been ruled by a dictator for 22 good years, but in solidarity and collaboration with us, the diasporas and the migrants here played very crucial role in uprooting him away. Through the financial support, remittances, and advocacy. Therefore, it has been recognized that remittances, mostly from Europe, constitute the second largest source of external private finance in African developing countries. Up to now, they are underutilized and badly managed source of national development in the countries of origin. However, the EU member countries has to bear their share responsibilities to highly entry barriers, and the criminalization of irregular migrants results in social exclusion and formation of ghettos of migrants in the European capitals, which of course discourage remittances because we rather prefer to care for our immediate own needs in an hostile social and political environment. In conclusion, I would like to reflect that African migration is a socio-economic dynamics since the times of the slave trade and colonialism. Due to these reasons, which impacted the high influx of migrants and refugees coming from the Africa, the conflict-ridden and poverty-stricken region of West Africa has become a cradle of migration from sub-Saharan Africa to Europe, where most African migrants with overseas destinations live. We flee from our desolate economic situation, violent conflicts, or political persecution, and we all need safety. I thank you all for your kind attention. Any more questions?
Thank you, Mr. Yaffa, for your personal story and the stories of migrants in Europe. We thank you for your insightful speech. Mr. Yaffa has kindly agreed to open himself to questions. Again, if you wish to pose a question to Mr. Yaffa, please access the BERMUN2 platform and send a message to the Secretariat via the forum mailbox using the General Conference Forum Info. We will now open the floor for 10 minutes of questions and answers. Are there any questions, Mr. Yaffa, on the floor? Okay. Our first question will be coming from a delegate. What do you think would be a good way to teach your migrant and other refugees about the situation in Europe?
I mean, what I always, emphasize is we all have to tell them the reasons, the reality about Europe, because from my story, as I said, knowingly and unknowingly means that, there are things that were narrated to me about Europe and the journey, that were not open, that were not realistic. So I think for me as a migrant, or as Africans living here in Europe who experience this journey, supposed to narrate the real facts to the people back home. Hey, let us tell them the dangers of the journey, which is the first part, the dangers of the journey and how we are living here in Europe. When I was in Africa, in the Gambia, I hadn't heard, heard of these informations. I never watched television. I never read an article or news where I had stories like this to read and to know what are the risks and dangers of Europe, the journey and Europe. So as a migrant, I think it is always tasked on us to narrate to the people back home about our personal experiences on the journey, as I said, through the Sahara Desert in Libya or any other channels, route to Europe in the Mediterranean or Atlantic Ocean. And of course, here in Europe, the challenges and difficulties that we are enduring here in Europe has to be narrated to them. Not only mainstream, but personally. This is supposed to be, a general task on us, as I am doing.
Thank you. We have another anonymous question from a delegate. Has the trauma resulted from the horrific journey from Africa to Europe inhibited refugees' abilities to adjust to functional work and life? What should host countries do regarding mental health for refugees and migrants?
I think one of the mental health, people know is that, okay, when we come to Europe, most of the people, if I say most of us, me from sub-Saharan Africa, and many people like me are not embraced, are not welcome. I think, this is one of the worst, one of the most dangerous thing that could, lead us into catastrophe, because when we come through this journey, we endure all these difficulties, challenges, this trauma. We got into Europe hoping that, okay, everything gonna be all right. We step here, we got into more trauma. We got into more trauma, more than the ones we have gone through. I think the host country has to open arms, embrace us, bring us, and then give us opportunities and show us the channels where to go and how and what to be, but not to keep us, as I mentioned, in the isolations, in the camps, in the refugee homes. For trauma plus trauma, then it would lead us dead. This is all.
Thank you. Another question will be coming from another anonymous delegate. What, in your opinion, is the most important action countries should take to make the immigration process easier?
To make immigration process more easy, I think, the most developed countries has to open, ways, to undeveloped countries, because imagine when I was in the Gambia, before leaving, if I could have access, to further my education, all possibilities in terms of economic and so on. If this is impossible, let them open, visa access to global south, countries, people from global south who are embarking, mostly from sub-Saharan African, who are embarking on this illegal journey. There should be an access where everyone could fly without embarking on this irregular migration that claim hundreds and thousands of lives. So this has to be, okay, who has what and what capability of doing and traveling for? There are many people who have other skills, as the speaker mentioned earlier. People with IT competencies, people with engineering competence, and many other competencies who are in the country, who are in the continent, who want to travel and explore this knowledge and widen it. I think if there is chance given to people home, people would have this optimism and courage to complete their education, to go for education, finish, and get their competencies, then could access everywhere in the world and go and explore this competency. But this is impossible. You will go to school, at the end of the day, you have no hope for your life, you have no hope for your living, you lose optimism, then what lead? I cannot make life here. I have to go through. I cannot get a visa. No, not possible. From the Gambia to Germany, it's impossible to have a visa to Germany. So all what you could do is just to risk your life in the Mediterranean, do or die. You die in the Mediterranean, or you get into Europe here. You consider as illegal migration with all the competencies you came with from your country are all vain, as far as you get into this soil without a legal permit.
Thank you. Another question will be coming from our SC president, Finn Kraft. A large majority of African economies have been continued to struggle throughout the 21st century, in part as a result of European colonialism. In your opinion, how can these countries become more prosperous, and should they rely on Europe and other former colonizers for help?
The thing is, I said, the migration is also impacted through colonialism and slavery and whatever. I think Europe should just accept that, okay, whoever is coming from Africa here, I mean, they call us economic migrants. So I think this way of addressing us as economic migrants should be something that should be nicer. You know, this should not be illegal thing. This should not be something abnormal. This should be a normal thing. I mean, I should come from the Gambia and go to outside the border or migration office and tell them that, hey, I leave my country because of economic problem. But we are unable to tell them the fact that, okay, we leave our country because of economic problem. You have to apply an asylum based on other reasons, but not economic reasons. So I think the fact that Europe should just accept that, okay, Africans are leaving the country because of poverty, which also impacted through colonialism and the history that Europe has made on Africans. So we are just coming for little. We are just coming for big, just big. They should just accept us to come, and we are working. As I said, you know, migration is not a zero game. They have their share, we have their share. Maybe they even have more to gain than we, who come from the Gambia or from Africa. So let them just accept it as normal thing. People come, people work, people live, people get money, and people survive, send money home. That it should not be criminalized. It should not be abnormal. It should just be a normal thing that people could live based on economic reasons, come and get money, then send remittance home and make their family survive. So I should not see any reason why should we be called economic migrants. I mean, why? Doesn't make sense.
Thank you, Mr. Yaffa. We'll be having 2 more questions and then we'll conclude. The next question will come from another anonymous delegate. In your opinion, should we first focus on making the journey of immigration safer for refugees or improve the living situations once refugees have already arrived at their destination?
I mean, it's not safe for them. I mean, the fact they have to take this illegal journey, as I said earlier, is that there's no other hope, there's no other way for them to take. So, I mean, it's sacrification, it's win and lose, win and win. So either you take, you lose, or you win, you get into Europe, you struggle. So I think whoever got into this journey, passes this journey to Europe, sacrifices his or her soul. And this person should be well embraced by Europe and well given protection by Europe or host countries. So this is only what I can say on that part.
Thank you. And we're having one more question. A delegate has asked from a delegate of the HRC representing Yemen, Andres Harbath. Could Mr. Yaffa please explain the meaning of his radio station's logo?
Okay. So the radio station is a community radio that was established through refugee movement that has started here. I mean, that has happened here in Berlin in 2012, 13. Personally, I was in part. I came to Europe, Germany in 2014, 2015. I met 2 of my colleagues who are also co-founders. So we established this radio station here since 2016 has official launch, and we are given slot from Media Center, Berlin and Brandenburg community radios. We are among other community radios who are sharing this 88.4 slot. I mean, so it's international. We are connected with people all over the world. I mean, we talk about politically, socially, economically, and culturally. I mean, more often we connect with the continent. I mean, we tell them, we narrate to them, we give them information, that are happening in everyday life of refugees here in Europe. So, I mean, it's very open and diverse. I mean, of course, it's just run by we 3 Africans, but it's not only an African radio, it's a global radio. I mean, it's the voice of the people. And so luckily, it's one of the first African self-run radio here in Berlin that we are proud of. So we hope, to network more, with people all over the world internationally, and to have many, platforms like this where we can be confident, organized, and independent, and give out our voice and be the voice of the voiceless.
Thank you, Mr. Yaffa, once again for your speech and your answers to the delegates' questions. Please accept this token of appreciation from us. We'll be sending it to you shortly.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you all for having me. I wish you all a nice rest of the program.
We will now have a 3-minute intermission. We encourage all delegates to get up and step away from the screen. We also have some music from our very own SC President, Finn Kraft, for you all to enjoy. The opening ceremony will continue at 17:18 Berlin time. Thank you. Thank you again, Finn, for that very nice music. Next, it is my pleasure to introduce one of this year's Deputy Secretary Generals, Lena Jekite. Currently a junior at the John F. Kennedy School, Lena has been part of the program for many years and is one of our most dedicated members. She has worked restlessly in the past months to help bring this conference to life. Madam Deputy Secretary General, you now have the floor.
Migration, a human right cemented in Articles 15 through 16 of the 1948 Universal Declaration on Human Rights. Migration, a right enshrined in the very essence of humanity. migration, the very thing that has brought us here today. But how should we think about migration? And how should we not? A common and commendable answer is to think about how migration morally. We think about migration morally when we advocate for the protection of human rights and we sympathize with the harrowing stories of those who made the journey via land or by sea. But morality is far from the only way to conceptualize migration, and I would argue that it's the wrong way. I propose that thinking about migration only in moral terms is inhibitory and exclusionary to the discussion at hand. But why is this so? And how can we think about migration through the lens of human rights? And how can it be limiting to discussions? To answer that, one must first choose between two divergent goods, the rights of states and the rights of the individual. Both rights are establishing principles of the UN and establishing principles for the stability of our world. So how are we meant to choose between them? We're not. We're not. But how do we put ourselves in this predicament? How have we gotten ourselves into a situation where the rights of migrants and the rights of people are contradictory? The answer lies in the Declaration of Human Rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights purports to be universal in its reach, but so are its critics. Its detractors focus on the document's worldview. Based on the ethical theory of moral universalism, which can be defined as the idea that some system of ethics applies to all people regardless of race, color, nationality, religion, or culture, the Declaration seeks to apply human rights and, in a broader sense, universal morals to prevent human suffering. However, this approach to establishing human rights excludes the various cultural and religious attitudes and interpretation of human rights, impeding on the rights of the individual, while greatly restricting the rights of states. These infringements on the state and individual level have consequences. In the early 1990s, the Islamic and Asian response to the Declaration's moral views were expressed in the Cairo Declaration of 1990 and the Bangkok Declaration of 1993. Both declarations emphasize the sovereignty and self-determination of states at the detriment of individuals. But why do these two opposites have to be at odds? I would say they don't, though I'm not alone. Laura Thompson, the Deputy Director of the International Organization for Migration, argues that the two seemingly contradictory rights can actually work in paradox. Deputy Director Thompson states that there is a fear that protecting human rights and placing the individual at the forefront of migration issues undermines state sovereignty. But this may in some way be detrimental to state sovereignty. Director Thompson goes on to state that we can use our paradoxical views of rights to interpret and use our moral fortitude to bend the rules of migration and bend the rules of our world. Together, we can create legislation and prioritize the way that migrants move throughout our world to help them and better organize our economies and rights. Individual rights are the rights of an individual, but the group's rights are also the rights of the group. As a group is made up of individuals, we can all equally see that protecting the rights of the individual, in the end, protects the rights of the group. And as stated before in our few keynote speeches, we can know that morals are important to our discussions. We also have to think, how do rights and rights correlate? The rights of states are important, as are political and economic issues in our society. But the rights of the individual are often ignored in these facets. And in today's conference, we ask that you, the delegates, presidents, and chairs of our committees, to think about how we can integrate migration and individuals' rights and states' rights under the same roof of managing migration in the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Deputy Secretary General, for your insightful remarks on how we should think about migration. In addition to the prior video dedicated to the stories of migrants, a committed group of JFKS students on the BERMUN2 press team have prepared a short introductory video for our conference.
Hello everyone, and welcome to BERMUN 2021. Hi, I'm Sky. I'm a student at JFK, and I would like to start off with a question for you. Have you ever thought of where you came from? My family is from the tiny tropical paradise called Guam, and I've been living in Europe since my childhood. This is my story, which actually is quite common and not unique anymore. In times of separation, technology helps us as a community to come together. Not only is the ability to operate online a benefit for us here at BERMUN, but it helps with school and staying connected with my family from across the globe. Learning, creating, and adjusting have become a part of my daily life. Not only has this ongoing pandemic triggered these requirements, but my family migrating has. Nowadays, migration has increased and it's common for us to come from different nationalities. Cultures of all varieties are mixed in the 21st century, creating a multicultural society. With phones, social media, travel technology, and many more factors, separation is no longer given, and migration is more possible these days. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, how do we manage migration in the 21st century? Why is this important right now? I mean, why did we even choose this topic? Marius is here to answer these questions for us.
Hi, I'm Marius, and I'm this year's President of the General Assembly. Migration for safety or economic opportunity has been around for ages. However, we wanted to put an emphasis on the shifting dynamics of migration in the 21st century. In 2019, there were an estimated 270 million migrants. This is a trend that is increasing. Commercial air travel and social media have given the world an unprecedented interconnectivity. With increasingly cultural diverse societies, the us versus them mentality is dissolving. The possibility to move thousands of miles and stay connected with your origin enables a dynamic cultural exchange. Where before migrating meant leaving your old life behind, nowadays, every person brings a part of their home with them. This leads to the beautiful cultural mosaic we see in many societies today. We wanted to steer away from increasingly obsolete ideas of singular national identity and draw attention to creating solutions for the harmonious living of different cultures. For our differences are something to be celebrated, not feared. Migration is a multilateral issue. Hence, it cannot be managed unilaterally. Populism and nationalism have led to the erection of walls that divide humanity. Migration is inevitable, and the world must come together to create resolute solutions for integration and acceptance. However, this does not mean eliminating borders. National identity and a feeling of community is a vital part of human society. As so often, the answer is finding a middle ground. In this case, managing migration with sustainable, effective policies so that everyone profits. For when unique perspectives come together, greatness is created. With these words, I urge you all to embrace principles of compromise and understanding to create a better future for all of humanity.
I hope you all have a wonderful time at this year's conference and find a way to make it your own kind of fun even though we're stuck at home. And with that, enjoy yourselves.
Thank you, Oliver Weissman and Skylar Estevez, for motivating us and inspiring us to collectively lead a discussion on the principles of migration in the 21st century. Please join us in giving them a much-deserved round of applause. At this time, we would also like to thank Matilda Gross, who has worked hard to encapsulate our conference theme in this year's artwork. Depicted in the art are migrants carrying their identities in the shape of mason jars, illustrating the ways in which migrants can carry their national, ethnic, religious identities with them to new places. Let us give Matilda a round of applause for her wonderful artwork.
For the past few months, it has been our pleasure to work with this year's team of student officers. We firmly believe that their contribution to each individual committee in terms of insight, character, and leadership will enrich all of our experiences at BERMUN. We will now introduce the student officers of BERMUN2 2021 by their respective committees, by showing what they look like and their names. The chairs in the GA3. The chairs in the Political Committee. The chairs in the Human Rights Committee. The chairs in the Junior MUN. The presidents of the Security Council. And the justices in the International Court of Justice. We would also like to acknowledge the heads of our administrative staff, Emma Robertson, Marla Cook, and Uvraya Starrett, for their great work in organizing this conference. Additionally, we would like to recognize our press editor-in-chief, Paulina Drautz. These student officers have proven to be an enthusiastic and resourceful team, and committed through the many isolating challenges of the pandemic. Their hard work will make this year's conference an especially unforgettable event. At this time, it is my distinct honor to declare the 16th annual BERMUN2 session as officially open.
Distinguished delegates, some of you now have the opportunity to address this forum and weigh in on the topics at hand. Although most ambassadors will be giving their opening speeches in their first committee session, some ambassadors volunteered to address the conference theme now and in this forum. This year, we have prepared a video with recorded speeches by 7 ambassadors. After these 7 speeches, we will be accepting rights of reply. A right of reply is a rhetorical question to one of the speeches which will not be answered. We ask that you keep your rights to reply clear and concise. If you wish to give a right of reply, please access the BERMUN2 platform and send a message to the Secretariat for mailbox using the category General Conference/Forum Info. Again, if you wish to give a right of reply, please access the BERMUN platform and send a message to the Secretariat for mailbox. After the speeches, selected rights of reply will be read out by the Secretariat. Again, we ask you to keep your rights to reply clear and concise. These 7 opening speeches will come from the delegations of Germany, Hungary, New Zealand, Turkey, the United Kingdom, the United States of America, and Yemen.
Yes. As a global community, we have a choice. Do we want migration to be a source of prosperity and international solidarity, or a byword for inhumanity and social friction? This choice is crucial. Migration shapes today's world in a way we have never experienced before. The unprecedented rise in migrants due to global warming and civil unrest has created new and difficult challenges for the international community, but also for every individual state to overcome. The crisis we currently find ourselves in may be a disruption to international peace and security, but it can also be a way to strengthen global cooperation. The 21st century is one of growth, innovation, and multidimensional progress, but it is also one of conflict, hardships, and instability. As member of the United Nations, we hold the great responsibility to decide the path of our future. Therefore, we, the international community, need to come together and embrace the challenges that stand before us. We are stronger, our voices are louder, and the synergy of our actions is more powerful together. Thank you.
Dear delegates, colleagues, esteemed guests, Mr. Secretary. Over the course of the next few days, we will attempt to tackle pressing immigration issues that many previous summits and conferences have failed to address or even just debate in an intellectually honest manner. Conservative approaches to the refugee crisis have been labeled as anything from nationalist over populist to racist, and those same terms have been weaponized to discredit and silence increasingly valid critiques of hyperliberal globalist approaches to immigration. This conference is an opportunity to reframe the discourse surrounding these issues in order to finally debate them productively. And to the delegation of Hungary, it's obvious that traditional liberal approaches have failed the citizens of those countries that have adopted them, and of course, there are those that have foreseen this early on and elected to combat meddlesome immigration and refugee legislation like our colleagues in Poland. And after some regrettable events that served as wake-up calls to many, even liberal-minded individuals find themselves disillusioned with over-optimistic political sermons of openness, diversity, and generosity. And it is our hope as a delegation that over the course of this conference, we will be able to rebuild trust and address the concerns of our citizens by developing comprehensive alternative plans that can ease some of the uncertainty these issues give rise to, because we need to chart a new course. Thank you.
Honorable President, distinguished Secretary General, fellow delegates. Since the start of this century, we've seen a distinct increase in the number of international migrants all around the world, reaching a total of 272 million migrants in 2019. While we need to take decisive steps to tackle the issues forcing people to leave their home communities, we also need to address the process of receiving and integrating migrants in countries of destination. While doing so, we should respect nations' fiscal and cultural concerns regarding immigration. But we should also recognize the huge economic potential of the additional workforce provided by immigrants, and respect the rights and stories of people trying to escape inhumane conditions. With that in mind, we hope that at this conference, delegates will be able to find viable solutions based on international collaboration and cooperation to manage migration in the 21st century. We want to wish everyone fruitful debates.
Honorable Secretariat, esteemed guests, and fellow delegates, migration is no strange phenomenon in a technological world such as ours, where a single phone call can reach every part of the planet in a matter of seconds. Even during a pandemic year, more than 280 million people have chosen to migrate to a different country. As the gateway between Europe and Asia, we, the delegation of the Republic of Turkey, have experienced migration firsthand for decades. In recent years, we have become one of the countries housing the largest number of refugees and asylum seekers on the planet. And yet, we understand the troubles that come with being a host nation, as well as the hardships refugees face. Amongst many problems, migration in the 21st century can quickly result to the radicalization of refugee camps and inequality of ethnic minorities, which in turn leads to the semblance of more terrorist groups. Therefore, the delegation of the Republic of Turkey is honored to be a part of this conference and is looking forward to insightful and fruitful debate with hopeful solutions at the end. Thank you.
Honorable Secretariat, distinguished guests, directors, and fellow delegates. Former Prime Minister Winston Churchill once remarked that it is no use saying we are doing our best. You have got to succeed in doing what is necessary. The current state of our world demands we do what is necessary at this conference. Make no mistake, migration is essential to the maintenance of democratic principles. At the same time, we must take care not to overwhelm the infrastructure of any one nation. The dangerous conditions that occur in such situations give rise to radicalization and terrorism. Such disregard does not represent our best. Collectively, we can ensure the humane treatment of migrants around the world. Collectively, we can stem the tide of nativism that has so often led to conflict. Collectively, we can ensure the light of democracy shines into all corners of the world. The United Kingdom believes that migrant rights are human rights. This delegation is prepared to work with other member nations to ensure this triumph of democracy to promote and defend human rights, and to do so equitably. We hope that all delegates of this conference will stand with us. We must succeed in doing what is necessary, together.
Delegates, the crises of our time cause violence, death, and suffering unmeasurable in severity. The ever-ongoing refugee crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic are two instances which are prime showcases of this. More than ever, it is important to seek and establish effective legislation whose means are not simply to expel asylum seekers and refugees from one's borders. The United States takes bold action to revise and improve its immigration system after a longer setback in said manner. In doing so, it is of the utmost priority to ensure basic, yet unfortunately often overlooked matters such as the reunifying of families and promoting the integration of new citizens. However, to address the challenge of irregular migration, it is of great importance to not only discuss the symptoms of the refugee crisis, but also its violent and scarring causes on an international level. Delegates, these are trying times, and without cooperation, they will not cease. Thank you.
Dear Secretariat, Honorable Chairs, fellow delegates and esteemed guests. Over the course of the last year, COVID-19 has shown the existence and impact of national borders in an unprecedented manner. The pandemic has forced individuals worldwide to retreat to their homes, but for some people, home is a complicated term. The UN Refugee Agency announced that at the end of 2019, an all-time high of 79.5 million people had been forced to flee their homes. Sadly, in Yemen the situation is devastating, and our people need immediate help since they are suffering from war, hunger, COVID-19, cholera, and the borders are blocked for aid. Therefore, we call upon all member states to unite so we can effectively improve the situation worldwide by treating the causes and not only the symptoms. Thank you.
We will now be entertaining 3 rights of reply. Again, if you wish to submit a right to reply, please access the BERMUN platform and send a message to the Secretariat Forum mailbox using the category General Conference Forum Info. After the speeches, selected rights to reply will be read out by the Secretariat. Again, we ask that you keep your rights to reply clear and concise. The delegate of Germany would like to ask the delegation of Hungary, how can the Hungarian delegate speak of wake-up calls as their nation slips into totalitarian dictatorship? An anonymous delegate asks, is it not hypocritical for the delegate of the USA to talk about reuniting families when they continue to separate families with their out-of-control deportation mechanisms? Seeing as there are no further rights to reply, we will be moving on to the closing announcements.
Before we adjourn and move to our first forum session, I have a few brief but very important announcements. On Friday at 16:30, Chris Metzler will speak directly about his work for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, the UNHCR, in Berlin. Among a long history of work, he spent months in Myanmar and is currently working in Tigray, Ethiopia. Although he has recently contracted COVID-19 while in Ethiopia, he still plans to join us virtually from there. He has a wealth of knowledge about refugees, and we look forward to his insight. This event can be viewed over the BERMUN YouTube channel. It will take place tomorrow at 16:30. Also, if you are not a participant and would like to keep updated with what is happening during the BERMUN conference, the BERMUN press team will report its work on the BERMUN website, bermun.de. If you are in the conference, be sure to stay updated with reports about the entire conference by reading the press page on the BERMUN platform. At this time, we would like to extend our sincerest gratitude to Alexander Gintar, who worked tirelessly on the platform throughout the last year. Alexander, your contributions are invaluable in making the transition to a digital conference not only possible, but exciting. Thank you again for your contribution. All delegates. Once your committee session starts, you will hear opening speeches from ambassadors and begin lobbying. Please be in your forum at 5 minutes before the hour, so at 17:55 Berlin time. All student officers. After the first committee session, please meet the Secretariat in the student officer Zoom meeting on the platform. All participants of BERMUN2, you will now join your first committee session on the BERMUN2 platform. Thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to seeing you all at the closing ceremony on Saturday. Thank you, and we now have some more of our SC President's music for you to enjoy.